employer or any affiliated organizations. So to that end, I'm a labor and employment lawyer. I've worked in private practice and I now work in-house. I also am a Crohn's patient and have had many periods of, I guess, intense illness and flares and also not, and navigating what that looks like and having to advocate for myself in a pretty able-bodied profession. Um, and so I really wanted to connect today and just provide some of this general information so we can, knowledge is power. And my hope is that after today, hearing some of this discussion topics, if you are navigating an accommodation for yourself, that you will feel maybe a bit more confident going into that conversation with your employer. So in terms of roadmap, we're going to talk about what is this duty to accommodate, what legal protections do you have, and just some general tips that I personally have seen. um, I work for an employer, so I am not employee side, but employer side. So navigating what kind of accommodations can be given in a professional sense. And then at the same time, I myself have accommodations because without it, I would be unable to do my job. So first of all, the basis for this duty to accommodate is the Ontario Human Rights Code. Every person has the right to equal treatment in employment without discrimination because of disability. There's a whole host of other code protected grounds as well, but disability is one. And just a quick note, disability is a very broad term. We're talking about a legal definition, and it really covers many things, including temporary illnesses, chronic illness, permanent illness, mental health, Crohn's, like really everything under the sun. So if you have a medical condition, it will legally most likely fall under this definition of disability. And should you go to the Human Rights Tribunal and you bring a complaint to say, my employer has discriminated against me based on disability, this is kind of the test for discrimination. And I'm highlighting this so you can understand where the duty to accommodate comes in. So basically, you have to show that you have a code protected ground. I have Crohn's disease. I wanted to work from home. They said I can't. I'm now not working, and now I'm out of lost wages, for example. And the next step would be that the employer will show as a defense the duty to accommodate. So this is kind of not that important for the context of today, but that's for your general knowledge. This is where the duty to accommodate has kind of arisen from. And the Supreme Court of Canada, has acknowledged that people who are able to work should do so, and that accommodations and this duty are important to make sure that all people can work, especially those with disabilities, and that they're not unfairly excluded. Because as we know, it can be work is important. It's a huge part of our identity. It creates stability, and there has to be some flexibility to make sure that all types of people can be able to participate in the workforce. So the duty to accommodate, you have an accommodation, and the point of stopping that accommodation is undue hardship. So that's a legal term, and we're going to get into it a bit more. But what does the duty to accommodate, what does it require? What are you supposed to do as an employer? Well, you're supposed to be able to look at the medical information that you have on file and be able to see how you can shift things to be able to allow that person to do their job. So it can involve flexible scheduling, modifying bundling tasks, allowing remote work, flex hours, looking out. So if able, if you work for a really large employer who has many employees, can they look outside that job, see if there's other jobs that you may be able to do? Can you work part-time? And the general consensus is that the employer has to accept some hardship. The duty to accommodate does not require a perfect accommodation. And so this means that, the legal basis is that the employer is the best person to understand the operational needs of their operations. And so they're the one to say, we're going to look at a range of options. And if it's deemed reasonable, we can decide what accommodation that is. And you're like, well, no, I wanted this. But if what they chose was actually reasonable, I'm going to give an example in a second, it will still meet the duty to accommodate. So an example is, I need a standing desk to deal with a sort of back issue. And you might say, I need this exact desk, but they can provide, a cheaper option desk and they buy that and that's not the one that you wanted, well, it's still a reasonable accommodation. Um, you're not like creating a new position, so you don't have to make a job to meet the duty to accommodate. And you don't have to accept unproductive work. So you don't just have to have someone in just to have them in to meet the duty. Um, you don't have to, give unilateral tops ups or displace other employees, which is kind of, these are all things that amount to this undue hardship test. But I think really what we're going to be talking about is more getting these accommodations established and moving forward uh, with having productive conversations with your employer to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success. So just on the topic of undue hardship, it's a very high threshold to meet. And when the tribunal is assessing these cases, they're looking at different contexts. So the size of the employer, like how much, how financially difficult is it to accommodate this person? The classic example is, we can't afford to put automatic door openers on every door for somebody who has an accessibility need, but a reasonable accommodation may be like putting a doorstop in. And is there a health and safety risk? And so this might be a common concern if you are like a classic example is I broke my leg and I'm a firefighter and I can't participate in the work field because I need to be able to, be mobile. However, there may be some sort of other task that you might be able to do on the downtime while you heal. So these are all kind of nuanced conversations that I have every day in my job. And then also, as I mentioned, have navigated myself throughout my many flares. um, so I think this is a part where I really wanted to spend some time. Um, when you have a disability and you're claiming a medical accommodation, you're most likely going to be asked for some information from your employer. So first of all, you never, ever need to disclose a diagnosis, ever. You're really only providing information that is allowing your employer to determine if you have functional limitations or restrictions. And so what does that mean? And you may get a lovely little form called a functional abilities form where you get, can you sit for up to 15 minutes? Can you climb stairs? Do you have any cognitive restrictions? And I look at these forms for IBD patients, which are, episodic invisible disabilities. And I go, these forms are useless. I hate them. They drive me crazy. And patients don't know what to do with them. Doctors don't know what to do with them. And then the information that's provided to the employer is not helpful. And it creates a real point of tension. So I think when you're thinking about the medical information that you want to provide to your employer, it's really what are you restricted from doing because of your Crohn's? And it can be a permanent restriction, so something that you need all the time. And it can also be for a period of time. So if you're going through a flare, a classic example is I need time off work. I am completely unable to work due to my medical condition. That is enough medical information to say, backed up on a medical note, that person should be off. It gets a bit more tricky when you're transitioning back. So you can have, I need a gradual return. Or just looking at my notes here. So, or a common example is working from home. I know not everyone works from home, but a large portion of us do. And with these kind of return to work mandates, it's getting a bit tricky. And there's a lot of tension, in my experience, of trying to push people back to the office. And, as we know, like we need access to a bathroom, but Crohn's and colitis, there's so much more involved in that. Maybe we need time at lunch to lie down or just take a break. And it's just going into the office, just physically getting there is just too exhausting in the current state that we are in. So let's say, you go to our lovely Sinai GIs, say, they're saying I got to go to work. I can't do it. I'm so sick. I'm having all these issues. And they say, no problem. And the doctor writes, this patient requires the ability to needs to work from home. Well, if that's not a restriction, that's an accommodation. So the employer is going to see that and say, I actually have no idea what your restrictions are. I can't follow through with this accommodation because I don't have the right information. If they're a good employer, they will ask for follow-up information. But sometimes they just say no off the bat. So don't stress. It just means that we need to rewrite the medical. And so something that, for me, I like the wording, this patient has a disability that is episodic in nature, fluctuating with unpredictable periods of wellness and disability. During symptom exacerbation, she may experience functional limitations, which includes reduced concentration and limited tolerance for travel. I think that is like my exact accommodation. And what that allows is not just bathroom access, it's more involved than that. And therefore, when I talk to my employer, I say, listen, I can't meet this work from home mandate all the time. Sometimes I can, and I'm feeling great, and it's no problem. And other times, I have to work from home. Here's my medical. This is the accommodation. Thank you so much. And then, you go through the kind of process of how to communicate what to get that accommodation up and running. But that's kind of what I had to do. There's some other legislation that I wanted to point you towards. So last year, I think, yeah, last year around this time, the Employment Standards Act was expanded in its protective leave to include long-term illness leave. So this is under the protective leave sections, which means you can take this leave similar to a maternity leave, where you're not supposed to be, your job is protected apart from very certain circumstances. And I think this is great because it covers episodic disabilities. Therefore, if you're going off and you're feeling worried that your employer may be terminating your employment because, it's been tense and you've been unwell and now you're going off and you're going, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. You can just engage in this, all you need is a medical certificate, which really just says from a healthcare provider saying, this is my patient and they have a chronic long-term illness that I'm seeing and they require this amount of time, reassessed out however many weeks. And you have 27 weeks maximum in a year period. And you can take it episodically. You don't need to take it altogether. You just need a new medical certificate, which is basically a medical note. And then also there's the Accessibilities for Ontario and Disabilities Act, which really just says workplaces need to be inclusive. So, accommodated bathrooms, privacy for, I think, I'm just trying to think of other Crohn's things. This comes in, a little less to play for us, but it's definitely still there. So I also want to just talk about some of the tips that I've learned from my own experience. I have had several times where I have had to take long extended leaves. I've also had to come back on a gradual return to work with reduced hours. I'm working in law. I was working downtown. I was working, I got a lot of resistance, I guess I would say. It took me a long time to find an employer that I liked for their accommodations, and B, also just took me a long time to have some conversations, because when you are the person that's sick, sometimes the employer will say, well, what do you need? And you go, I don't know. You're the employer. Tell me what you could give me. And you're kind of at this impasse. And it can feel really overwhelming because you're not well. You're trying to navigate this. I always find it very unarming. Usually I cry, which feels embarrassing because you're trying to be professional. And so some of the things I've learned is sometimes some targeted words to put it back on the employer. So I'll say, I'm really struggling with the amount of work like I need that's coming at me in my file list right now. And, I can do good work, but it's taking longer because I have reduced concentration. I'm on some steroids and I'm just finding it a bit hard, and I don't know how to manage my files appropriately while also, maintaining good client contact and all that jazz. How do you think I should do this? The issue is I have too much work. How can you help me with this in the form of an accommodation? Can we put some, go-betweens in place? Can we meet more frequently as a supervisor to talk about, just little things? I need more of your time, and we're in this crazy busy place and I never see you and I'm just on my own all the time. Can we have more touch bases? I need to work from home more often. Like, can we, and I find it really difficult to always have to text the group that I'm working from home, and it makes me feel, it feels unnecessary and, personally a bit embarrassing. Can we do something more private where I just need to message you? Or I'm just trying to think of other things that have come up um, in my time. I'm on a biologic. I'm immune compromised. I get sick a lot. That's not part of my accommodation, but I also have the common cold and, I get infections and all this jazz. So sometimes maybe I need a reduced start date. Can we trial that for a couple of weeks and see if it works? And accommodations, like not every accommodation, I think, especially when we have these forever illnesses that have fluctuating times of health and wellness. And sometimes, you are really well, but you're dealing with a complication. And as we know, Crohn's and colitis, they're so complicated. And you just, every time I feel like you're finding your footing, at least for me, then something else happens and you're going, oh, you know, I've never dealt with this before. And what's happening with my skin? And, you're managing appointments and I can't schedule these appointments outside of work. Like can we work on that? Can I, start earlier so I can meet my infusions that start at 4 p.m. or whatever it is. So all this to say, it's a collaborative approach. Um, I find if you're having an unproductive conversation, and you're feeling really frustrated, uh, sometimes I like to take a pause and say, can we continue this conversation next week, in a week? I need like a week to think about it. And then you can kind of digest, figure out what you want, and come back and really articulate what it is that isn't working. I really view my accommodation conversations, even though I deal with it every day. I deal with accommodations every day, and I still find navigating my own accommodations challenging and nerve-wracking. And so I really try and view it like its own job in the way that you sometimes have to view managing your medical appointments like your own job, right? We're all so adept at advocating that sometimes I think we sell ourselves a little bit short. So regular check-ins. I'm sorry, I'm going off my list, but yeah, you can ask for more time. You never need to. Also, sometimes people don't know the human rights code and they'll ask you for things that they're not entitled to. They'll say, "What's wrong with you? What do you have? Oh, is that a pooing disease? Like, what does that mean? Like, what's happening here?" These are all things that have happened to me. And I just say, like, you're really not entitled to that information. I don't really feel comfortable disclosing, but I'm more than happy to talk about how to make this work. I really want to set myself up for success. I really love to talk more about managing the work. Um, so I'm just, yeah, so I've talked about that. Um, One of the things I get a bit frustrated with is sometimes I feel like I'm really driving solutions in these accommodation conversations because there's such a lack of understanding about these conditions, especially if they're episodic, they're invisible, and you're just sometimes dealing with just frankly ignorance. And it's really easy for me to get very frustrated. And I'm like, why am I the only one figuring this out when you're the employer and you have all these resources and you have all this training and I just want to work and I want to be successful and I'm ambitious. Um, and I really think the mind shift that I have in that frame is that I also am the one that knows my limitations the best. And I also am the one doing the work. And I also know intimately like what's not working. And so I try and shift that when I'm feeling frustrated into, once again, this is not what's working. This is what I'm struggling with. What do you think about that? And putting it back on the employer and saying, what accommodations can you provide me to help manage this? Um, and I think sometimes speaking with some friends, like, or there's sometimes a stigma with accommodation, and I just always want to remind people, uh, there's nothing wrong with asking for an accommodation. Like the Supreme Court of Canada is like, this is a totally legit thing to have. It's about creating a sustainable way of work. It's allowing you to have longevity. Um, so, if you ever have any kind of, I don't know, I used to feel very uncomfortable asking for accommodations. I felt it was like a sign of weakness. I'm over that now. But it's not. And so many people, you would be shocked about how many people have accommodations. So many people have accommodations, and it's really just allowing you to have a meaningful working life. And also, as I said, we're already navigating this illness, this chronic disease. We're navigating healthcare, we're navigating appointments and tests and uncertainty all the time. That I really think Crohn's and colitis patients are truly some of the best advocates I've ever met, and that there's a lot of strength here, and you know what you need, and you are very very well, just from your life experience, positioned to kind of sort out some accommodations for yourself. So that is the end of my slides. I feel like I rushed through it a little faster than I thought. But I'm also happy to have more of a nuanced conversation. Um, Sorry, I can't read your name tag. It's Dave.
Go back to the second slide.
Like in the this one?
One, there was one what that said top up.
Oh, unilateral top-ups.
I don't know what that is, and also ignoring qualifications.
Yes, I can. So for those who couldn't hear, I just wanted some clarity on what unilateral top-ups are and ignoring qualifications or skill sets. So a unilateral top-up is um, that you don't need to be compensated for time that you're not working. So if you are, let's say you have an accommodation, your Remicade schedule is every 4 weeks and you're a 3 hour infusion and you can only schedule it during working hours. The accommodation may be, yes, we're going to let you go. There's no ramifications for getting that, time off, but we're not going to be paying you for those 3 hours off because you're not working. So that, because to be paid for that, I mean, this is also people who are maybe more on a shift and not a salary schedule. That would be kind of a unilateral top up. It's more common in like union context where you're really tracking your hours or uh so that's kind of what it is. If you're a salary worker, unilateral top ups is not really relevant to you. Ignoring qualifications or skill sets. So if you have, I'm just trying to think of a way to explain this. Um, you are, given a reasonable accommodation. Let's say you have a range of duties, but some are like, let's say you work in some sort of clinic, like maybe you're a dental hygienist and you have administrative work, but you also have clinical work, and you need to work from home. And they say, okay, so we're gonna give you some administrative work, and we might add some work that other roles are doing to be able to fill your day for the full 8 hours of work or 7 hours of work. Um, and you have the skill set to do some of these roles, but you don't really like doing them. You're like, I don't want to do like data entry, or I don't want to do this. I don't want to set up people's appointments. Like that's not really what I want here. I just want to do the admin role that's connected to my kind of in clinic role. Well, you're kind of ignoring some of the skill sets that you have that may not necessarily be in your traditional job, but you've bundled from other jobs to make sure that you can still go to work. Does that make sense? Oh. Yeah. There any other questions?
We have a couple of questions that have come up through the chat. I can read them aloud if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, actually, they're all popping up. So the first one is, hi, I'm Sue. In 2013, I had bowel surgery and an ileostomy performed. I was working as an ECE in a daycare with preschoolers, but when I went back to work, oh, sorry, Sue, the rest of your message seems to have cut off. If you want to maybe add in the rest, and I'll go to the second question. Or if you wanna speak over the screen as well too. Okay, I'll move to the second question while hopefully Sue can write the rest of her question. This is from Alexandra. Hello, any recommendations for chronic fatigue for a work accommodation? Some mornings are better than others, but some I struggle to get up.
I also have some issues with chronic fatigue. So this is kind of what I was discussing in terms of like the medical information is I think it's looking at what's not working. So what I'm hearing, and once again, this is just my opinion, this is not legal advice, but for me, it's that like that hard 8 a.m. start, right? You're like, oh my gosh, sometimes I wake up and I'm fine. And sometimes I'm like, I simply cannot, and I need to start at 10. And so it might be that you like get some medical information on file that says at times the patient is unable to um, perform. It's like so hard because it's like you don't want to totally cut yourself off, but this is where, get some medical information saying that those morning hours are difficult, and that the fix would probably be some flex timing of when you can start, and that's a pretty reasonable accommodation. uh, I can't, depending on what your job is, I'm not sure, but you know, to me, for me, I'm like, if I can just have an extra 2 hours of sleep and start maybe at 10 a.m., that really helps me. And then I can work into the evening once I'm revved up to go. But it's really, I think, taking a look at what it is that you're struggling with and bringing it to your employer. And sometimes also, if it feels safe and you feel, you have a good relationship with your supervisor and say, listen, I've brought this accommodation. Um, it's moving forward, but I always say I like to set myself up for success. It's like my go-to slogan, but it's true because I want to set myself up for success. I'm starting at 10 a.m. Do you see any, ways that we can make this transition easier? Like I'm here to be a good worker, but also this is the accommodation that's coming in. I wanted to give you a heads up, and I'm happy to talk about it as needed.
Great.
Sorry, I just had another thought. Another thing that you could do is um, just totally reduced hours. Just like I was saying flex time. So you start, if you start later, then you end later. Another thing you can do, which I've done when my fatigue was really bad, is I just went down to reduced hours. And it doesn't have to be forever. I think I, had, every 6 weeks I'd see my doctor again. Are we ready to gradually go up? Does it have to be part time? No, it can be 80%. Like you can change it. It's as I mentioned, it's how the medical is written and how the employer kind of interprets that. But I think that's another option if you're really struggling with your fatigue. Thinking about, is that 100% work time manageable for you? Well, once you have the medical on file, it's not that you're going down to part-time. You're asking for medical accommodation, and it could be permanently, but it could also be just, a trial period while you're managing high symptoms, or you're starting new drugs, or you're investigating, and through the course of this investigation, you're going to be working on reduced hours. So that's another kind of solve that might be helpful.
So we have another question from Mel B. They're asking, does the legislation mentioned, ESA and AODA, exclude any groups? And a few are listed as examples: employment versus labor, private, municipal, provincial, federal, etc.
So the human rights applies to everyone. It doesn't matter government, if you're a union employee, if you're a non-unionized employee, every employer has the duty to accommodate, period. There are certain exceptions when that accommodation can be overridden. I don't know. I'm not saying the right word here, but and that's when there's a bona fide occupational requirement for the job. So the classic, example case law is that uh, firefighter case in BC. They said you have to be able to lift, I think it was like 100 pounds, and this individual had some weakness in their arms and they couldn't lift that much weight. And they said, you're discriminating against me because um, I can't do that, and I should be able to become a firefighter. Well, it was deemed that due to the role of being a firefighter and what you're required to do, they were discriminating against that individual, but it was a bona fide occupational requirement of the job, and therefore it was justified. So I'm trying to think of an example that would be relevant maybe to this group. So let's say you are um, a shift worker and you can't work night shifts, but the job specifically that you were hired for was a night shift job, not just a job that has shift that sometimes works nights, but like a specific in the job description, that's what you're working for, and you can't manage the nights. Well, if it's the core element of the job, then the accommodation doesn't need to be respected. But I think in terms of a lot of the times for Crohn's and colitis accommodations, they're normally not that well. I don't know. Normally, it's like from my experience for myself, it's like you need time off to get the treatment that you need when you need it, surgery or you're inpatient or whatever. And then it's things that allow you to have enough energy to do your job, have enough time to go to the bathroom and do what you need to do, and enough kind of sometimes I have issues with brain fog. If you have like a much more physical job, like normally there's abilities to um put certain restrictions on your physical, like what you're lifting, what you're carrying, what you're pushing, um, as well. So those are kind of I don't know if that fully answered all your questions. I can't remember all the other parts, but um feel free to put in the chat if you still have follow-up questions on that one.
Okay, so I have the remainder of Sue's question. So she mentions how she had abdominal surgery in 2013, and when she returned to her job as an ECE, they were requiring her to be in the kitchen lifting trays, which she wasn't able to do. So she did ask to go back into the classroom, and they wouldn't let her. She did leave the job, but she was short a few hours in order to qualify for her EI sick benefits.
So, just because I'm not giving legal advice, I'm not going to speak directly about that situation because just from an ethical standpoint. But I think, if you're in a situation and you feel like you've exhausted all of your options and you feel like, there's a situation where there is an element of discrimination, anyone can go to the Human Rights Tribunal and bring a claim. It is worker friendly, so you do not need legal representation to bring a claim, although there are many human rights lawyers out there. And you have 1 year limitation to bring a claim. So based on the last event, so if you get terminated, you have 1 year from that termination to bring a claim where you can say, "Hey, listen, I feel like this was unfair. I feel like back to this test for discrimination. I had Crohn's disease. I had a um, accommodation request. Uh, they didn't meet it, and therefore I was forced to leave my job, and now I'm out hours. And also, usually there's some sort of monetary amount if there's found discrimination. All human rights complaints since a year and a half ago go through mandatory mediation, and so there's avenues in that regard in terms of if you want to address your rights that way. I will say that if you are in a situation where you're trying to you can also bring a human rights complaint at any time. You don't have to be terminated. You can still be working and bring a complaint if you feel uh, that is something that you would like to do. And there's a protection within the Human Rights Code that you cannot receive any reprisal for bringing a complaint. So that means, let's say you were still in that job, but you just had to go on sick leave instead of leaving the job altogether. You can say, and then you bring a complaint, and then you come back and you feel like you're getting all this, like bad shifts or situations that are purely arisen because you have this human rights claim on file. That's a violation of the code, which would also be could be addressed at the tribunal.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that's come in from Mel B. Any recommendations for union reps when advocating for workers where the employer is trying to force out a worker seeking disability accommodations, facing discrimination, targeting from the employer? So I'm not sure if you had, I know that you
I
addressed.
do actually. I work with unions quite a bit, so I think from a union rep perspective, where you're helping advocate on behalf of a union member, uh, so obviously there's the grievance process where you can bring a grievance to say, this you have violated the collective agreement. Every collective agreement has um, mention of the code. It's also you're in violation of the human rights code because you're not accommodating appropriately. I think also though, this is when these conversations, come back to like where's the disconnect happening here? And I truly feel a lot of the time it comes back to the medical that's on file and that it's not. I'll be frank, I work on the other side, right? So I'm management. So sometimes I'm dealing on the other side of this. And normally by the time it comes to me, it's past union reps, it's going to arbitration. And I feel that sometimes it's a misunderstanding that what's on the medical is not, it's a medical recommendation of an accommodation, such as this person needs to be close to a bathroom, as opposed to really exploring what those personal functional limitations are. So, from a union rep perspective, is there any benefit in asking for updated medical? Asking the employer, like, what is it that you're missing? Like, I can go back to my union member and have them um, get it. Sometimes also, it's the GI. It doesn't have to be the GI. It can be your GP that provides information. It doesn't have to be that specialist who's treating a disease. It can also be your GP, who frankly sometimes is easier to get into, to see, get the note, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, yeah, assessing where the disconnect is, and then trying to move forward on that piece, and then moving through the grievance process. Uh, as applicable. And then also, you can always tell your union member about their rights at the Human Rights Tribunal, which is a separate process from the union process.
So I don't see any more questions in the chat, but there might be some more that are coming. But I was hoping, Megan, that you could answer a question of mine.
Of course.
So first I had a comment and then a question. So I've just gone through navigating my own situation where I was off for an extended time. The first one was planned and the second one was not. And I had a really great experience. I was really fortunate. But it was hugely stressful because I'd never done it before. And just as a tip for anyone else, I wish that I had seen this before I had gone. But I did go through my GP, who was very helpful. And one thing that I did is that I tried to write the note as I maybe thought it should be written. And then I would bring that and a blank form with me to my GP every time and say, this is what I think that I need, and I've tried to write it out for you. And I know every doctor is different, but my doctor hugely appreciated the fact that someone had taken the time to write it all out. And she really worked with me, and she actually she took everything that I had said and liked it, and she actually even added a few things or extended the time that I had suggested. So I found that to be really helpful, just in the logistics of the visit and going in with a plan. But yes, I did find it very stressful. But my question, Megan, is I'm wondering, I guess just on a general level for people with IBD or other chronic illness, would you recommend trying to get some sort of accommodation on file in general before you have an issue? I'm just trying to think of going forward. Should I be trying to get something on file that says, if another episode happens or a flare up or something, or should I just wait?
I think it's preference based. How comfortable are you where you're working with your supervisor or whoever? Like, some companies have amazing, HR departments, and some others have left you are left feeling a bit wanting. So I think, every situation you have to take stock of. I personally have these thoughts all the time for myself. So I'm going to answer your question kind of in three parts. The
Yeah.
first part I just wanted to say is I also come to my doctor with things written out, and she changes it as she feels comfortable, but I think it's helpful. And I just wanted to say that if you ever get this form, how I deal with it is I just have my doctor write at the bottom, see attached letter, wherever it's appropriate, see attached letter. Because sometimes you get these legal forms and this is a WSIB form, but a lot of workplaces have these forms too. And you go, oh my gosh, like this form, like I hate them. I hate them because they're so restricting. And so, you're not married to this form. This is just how the employer is trying to get the information. So I just have my doctor say, see below, see below, see below, and then they write out whatever it is they want to write out. And then if the employer wants more information, they can follow up as needed. So I too also, come with what I want, and I hopefully from this information, you will remember that it's you're outlining your restrictions and not kind of what the accommodation is. So the second part of that is terms of, do you want to have an accommodation on file? It really depends. I think I normally put some accommodations. Sometimes you don't even know the accommodations that you like. We're so drilled in just functioning at a high capacity and managing so many juggling things that you don't even know that there's things you can get accommodations for. So I always have a standing accommodations for medical appointments, medical testing. Like every time I have to get I find it so stressful. Every time I have to get a bowel MRI, I'm like, oh my gosh, this can take like a huge chunk of my day. When's it coming? Can I get a cancellation? It's booked for next year, or like I'm trying to get in earlier. Then you have to go in and drink. We all know the joke. You got to get. Then all of a sudden you're like, you're getting a colonoscopy next week, and so I always just have for treatment. Also, like my Remicade, and I actually found a clinic that does it on the weekend, which I didn't even know was a thing. Um, I find that like for me highly stressful, just like navigating all my appointments. And so I always have a standing accommodation for myself. This patient is in treatment. She requires regular maintenance treatments, diagnostic testing, medical appointments, which will happen during working hours. And then I block off my calendar and I say, this is my medical accommodation. I'm off. I'm unavailable. I'm at a medical appointment. Uh, the, the more nuanced, and also I have a standing accommodation to work from home as needed. And I just say, I will engage this when I need, and I send an email and I say, I'm engaging my medical accommodation today and I will be working from home. And if they need more information, they can get it. In terms of I used to have a standing accommodation for like a flare contingency. I think post-pandemic, it's a bit different. I think in any event, if you are making significant changes for an accommodation to deal with an unpredictable period of illness, you're probably going to need medical to support it anyways. And so currently where I am today, which is not where I was 2 years ago, is I will just deal with that when I'm dealing with it. And you can say, list to your employer, they're like, we need a medical note after your third day of illness. A lot of people have that. So sometimes I'm thinking about this now. I will see I can get into a doctor's appointment within, a reasonable amount of time if I'm experiencing flare and I'm needing time off. It may not be within this 3-day time frame which you require. So, because it's hard to know what you're going to need in a flare because every flare is so unique and at the same time absolutely not unique. They're like familiar and totally unfamiliar at the same time. So it's really your comfort level and like, how much is it going to help you? Is if it's going to give you the peace of mind to have that conversation up front, do it. But if you are feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm like having this conversation with the employer, it's causing me so much stress for something that's not even here, I don't feel like they're that supportive, then maybe just deal with it as it comes up. I know that's not, hopefully that's helpful. It's not a very direct answer. And then the next thing I was going to say, which I have gone back and forth and tried many different ways, is when to disclose in general. And I know that for me, I had many periods of time where I either was not working, and so it looks like on my resume either that in one instance, I was articling, and articling is only supposed to be like a 10-month thing, and it took me 2 years. So immediately, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I like? People are going to ask me about that, which they did. Of course they did. What is my answer going to be for that? For that one, I just said I got COVID and it, you know, sick. People seem to take that as it was. Whether that was truthful or not, I don't know. But the other thing is I had a very significant leave very early on, and I could not go back to my employer because I did not feel like it was a good fit. I didn't think the accommodations were that good, and so I said, okay, I need to get a new job. On my resume, it says I'm a third year lawyer. I have worked 3 months. I know nothing. I'm like, there's no way I can step into a job and be functioning at a third year level. I've, and I'm going into these interviews and they're going, how many times have you been to court? I'm going, none. How many times have you done this? None. Have you had this? We started. I left before it was done. Like you're trying to say all the things, but at the end of the day, I didn't have the experience. And so I really wasn't sure how much to disclose in that situation. And I had had a bowel resection and it took longer to heal. And anyways, every single job that I disclosed where I had a chronic illness, I did not get the job. I was having a terrible time to getting the job. And I felt like, although I didn't have any proof, it was a form of discrimination. It's a very able-bodied field. And I'm not saying this to like be doom and gloom. I'm just saying that I really had to change how I thought about getting a job. And I said, you know what? I'm never going to get a job at this stage in my life when I have this significant experience gap and I need this new job. I don't want to go back to where it was because that was an option too. Just go back and look for a job while you gain experience. And I said, absolutely not. It's going to deteriorate my mental health. No, siree. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to network my way into a job, which felt very daunting and exhausting. And I just started reaching out. I started reaching out in this group. I looked for any sort of disabled advocacy group, any lawyer who ever had an accommodation or disability on a blog post, on a Reddit post, on a LinkedIn. I was messaging them saying, look, I'm a disabled lawyer. I cannot work these crazy hours, but I'm super keen. I'm ambitious. Who do you know that is a good employer? And through this kind of networking, it didn't happen right away. It was slow. I was able to get a contract job. And that contract job, it wasn't permanent, it was mat leave cover. They knew my situation. They were very supportive. And it allowed me to build up that experience to cover that gap. So when I looked for my next job, I didn't have to disclose a thing. Have you been to court? Yes. It was once. Do they need to know that? No. Do you have experience with this? Yes. But I did. I got a lot of experience while also in a place that was um, supportive and allowed me to kind of gradually work up to working a full-time schedule. So that's just a little rant, but more just to provide awareness that, there are many different types of ways to get a job, have a job, work through these accommodations. And I think, you also learn every time you do something. And, what feels right now might change and that's okay. But accommodations, as I said in one of my slides, it's a conversation and it's learning. It's in the same way that you are learning about your illness constantly. You're constantly also learning how to work with it in a workplace.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I know it's hard to speak to all situations, but it was really helpful to hear a bit of your story too, and kind of think of how I need to move forward. So, we do have
we have a question in
oh, great.
a live question.
I remember leading up to uh, like elected, I was working for a large employer, and I could tell them this is the approximate date, and this is how long I would be out based on the surgeon's expectation when I was going to recover.
Mm-hmm.
But the rules that the company had were they couldn't really respond until I had gone 5 days and exhausted and then gone into short-term disability. And then they were allowed to hire back up. And then there was a long-term disability process that kicked in. And then my surgery kept getting delayed because it was technically elective, wasn't really that elective. In the end, they hired a co-op student. who I trained and who was ready to take on the prior responsibility when I left. But that feels like a very pragmatic, very open way of determining the solution. Is there any way around, like there's some very strict rules here. There's hard legislation, there's human rights issue. If people disagree, suddenly everyone's flaring up. It feels like there should be some way through a mediator or through a medical professional that people can talk and reach an accommodation and understanding without duly releasing your medical information to the company and without the company feeling like they're a legal threat if they don't accommodate.
Yeah.
Is there,
Sorry, yeah, I hear what you're saying. So just for everyone online, I'm not sure if you heard that, but essentially, um, experience of having was it colectomy?
is it, well, there's
IBD surgery, and and through that experience, it feels like you have these human rights, they're violated, you can go to court, let's fight about it, lawyer up, expressing your legal rights, and then you just at the end of the day, tell me if I'm getting this right, but at the end of the day, it's like no one wants to be going to court. You just want to be getting an accommodation and doing your job. And is there kind of an in between, um, you know, and there's also in a lot of it, you're also dealing with short-term disability and long-term disability and these rigid kind of HR practices of when you can get medication, when you need the doctor's notes and when you can respond and when you can backfill the position when that person's off. And it feels kind of rigid and sometimes not very conducive to this accommodation need, which is sometimes more organic. I don't know. Is that accurately reflecting? Okay. So I think I totally agree. Um, as I said, I find medical accommodations a conversation. I will say that not all employers are equal. Some are incredibly sophisticated, and others are smaller and maybe less so. I think uh, most employers, when you're giving like your medical information, should never, in my experience, is and should not be widely, sent to everyone. What's being sent is your restrictions. So you may have like a point person who's like an ability specialist or an HR specialist or whomever who is a contact who you're dealing with who's saying, this is the medical that we need, or we're following up, and they're kind of like your point person. But any information about your situation is supposed to be private. Medical information is highly private and really um, in legislation is respected as so. And it's really just your restrictions. This person will be off on a leave at this point for 6 weeks, and then we'll reassess at that time. So that should quell any fears that your medical information is being like spread throughout the company. It's private. But I think sometimes companies are great and sometimes they're not. And the advice that I would give, just from personal advice, not legal advice, is to have these ongoing conversations, which sometimes can be really hard because sometimes you're really not dealing with somebody who is maybe empathetic or understanding, or you're not getting a lot of movement, but a lot of, sometimes maybe there's someone else that you can talk to if you have a supervisor or their supervisor and saying, I'm having some trouble here. Like I'm really just like I find that when there's a willingness to try and make things work, it becomes easier on all parties. I think, knowing it's interesting because I work as a lawyer, a litigating lawyer. I'm constantly going to the tribunal on human rights issues, and it's never clean cut in terms of your rights were violated. Here's a chunk of cash. There's always going to be um, it's not a very fun process. And so, if you can avoid it, that would be better for everyone. So I think when you are trying to find something that works, is I try to not say successfully, I try to remove the emotion out of it and look at it from a really practical lens. And then I say to the employer, someone who, I respect and maybe feel safe with, which sometimes not everyone always has. I understand that. But to say, like, what's missing here? You know, um, a very common example that I think some is relevant to this group is that this whole like conversation around needing to go to the bathroom. Okay. You're like, that is such a simplified version of it. I have one of my symptoms is I vomit a lot. And so listen, like they're like, of course we will like I've seen this. The employer will say, you say I need access to the bathroom and I need the ability to take breaks to go to the bathroom. I would really like to work from home. And they say, we're not really, that's not really a medical restriction that you need to work from home, but we understand that you have a medical restriction that you need to be close to a bathroom. So we've placed your office next to a bathroom. And you're going, okay, listen, I've been to that bathroom. Just because it has a disabled stall does not mean it's one that I would like to be sharing with all my colleagues. Like, trust me, nobody wants me using this bathroom. But also, it's not just going to the bathroom, it's that I'm vomiting. And sometimes um, I need to lie down after the bathroom because I'm really tired, or, I need to do a bag change and it's really not conducive in this area. And so that, and then you're all of a sudden you're like in this fight with this employer. I need to work from home. No, you don't. I don't have. And that's kind of like, I feel like I've said this, but it's going back to the medical and saying, okay, maybe I need updated medical to share that my restrictions are more expansive than originally put. And then you can come to your employer and say, hey, just so you know, I know we've been having this conversation. I'm getting updated medical to support my position. I'll be sending it in. And they'll say, most likely, they probably won't say much. They'll say, thank you so much, and we'll look at it and we'll let you know. But sometimes it's just having this almost like problem solving, which again, is not always fair and can be incredibly frustrating. But it's having these ongoing conversations about trying to set yourself up in a way that will allow you to work to the best of your abilities. Um, so yes, is there a better way to manage these accommodations and have a more um, proactive, collaborative approach? That's the hope. And hopefully some of the things from this presentation will allow you to feel more confident in having those conversations. Because I also understand that sometimes having those conversations are incredibly stressful. And it's hard to be the employee having these conversations and you don't know what's going to happen on the other end. So you can also, I'm just trying to think of other things that might be helpful. Like obviously if you have a union, having a union rep with you, um, working, you know, is there somebody who has like disabilities management or abilities management? Is there a specialist who you can connect with and say, I'd really like to talk to you about this. Like I'm dealing with this in my team. It's not really working. What do you think? And behind the scenes, what happens sometimes is that gets kicked up to somebody in legal, like myself, and we say, "What are you doing? Give them the accommodation." So you also don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and I think if you have someone in your organization that you have a good relationship to, who's part of management, that can also be helpful. I don't know if that's a very strong answer, but that's kind of what's rolling through my brain right now. Yep, it's John, right? John?
Yes, yes, I've
Yeah.
waited a long time just listening to all this. Megan, you're amazing. You're absolutely amazing. In my practice of 50 years as a chiro, I've been dealing with administrative FAFs up my yin yang. And I find it's best when we have a patient who's a good historian, who can bring information, makes my job so much easier. Or I'll go through it with them and make sure that they understand what we're putting so that we're not just throwing it out there. I have very good friends who are physicians. Some of them accommodate people no matter what. Others are more, didactic. But I think it's, when you've had illness and you've been a patient and you've had disability, and now we're on the other side as a doctor, as a lawyer, I think we have a bit more empathy and a bit more understanding. So good on you. Good on you. Really great.
Oh.
Congrats.
Well, and to be frank, I went into this line of, I love labor and employment law. I went into this because in law school, I also had a really tough time and that was on steroids. Like it's been a bit of a rocky journey. And I basically saw the industry and said, oh, I'm going to be discriminated against here. Like I better know my stuff. And that's kind of what, and it's also a job of relationships as well, which I like. But part of it was that I wanted to protect myself, and so um, I
Is
really also just want to emphasize that like everyone who has one of these illnesses, like you guys are like the most like this the stuff that we've had to figure out and go through and push through and just deal with on a daily basis is amazing. And so it's so stressful these situations, but then, like just remember, like if you shit your pants in the eating center, you can have a conversation about accommodation. That's what I tell myself. That's my little go-to. I was like, you've done hard things. Like you can do hard things. And then once you do it once, it gets easier. And like listen, every time I have to request accommodations when I am counsel at tribunal and at human rights, they send it to all parties. And I used to just say it needs to take like more than frequent breaks. And now I'm like, she must have a bathroom break because I'm like, end stigma. But, it's like these are I used to feel a lot of embarrassment, and now I just try and come at it with a lot of grace, sometimes more
most of
success.
your clients IBD related, or is it just all kinds
So
of?
I'm employer side, so I work for a large organization, and I see everything under the sun, like truly everything. So um and also, as I said, like a lot of the time until we're like going through the final stages of document discovery, I don't see the medical a lot of the time until the very, very end because it's private.
I'm just doing a chronic pain report with a physician, and it's very rare, but this young lad has colitis, and he was in a car accident, and it's not too difficult to connect not only his behavioral problems that he has, but also colitis and the anxiety and the uptick of all this. So yeah, I'm constantly putting that in there to help the lawyer deal with the case. Yeah, and this was the most recent one I've just done. Anyway, thank you.
Megan, do you
Yeah,
have time to answer a couple more questions that
I
came in?
do. I do have time. I've got all the time.
Okay. So Netta is asking about when we talk about undue hardship, what is the limit for the employer? For example, if someone needs 30 minutes in a 7.5 hour day to use the restroom, why can't the employer pay for that time instead of it being unpaid?
So I would say, like not having all the facts, but just hearing that on its face, that's really not an undue hardship conversation. That's more of a reasonable accommodation. So that's going back to kind of what is the duty to accommodate and what's not duty to accommodate. So, if the request is I need 30 minutes to go to the bathroom, and the employer has decided that, and this is hypothetical, I don't know your situation or your job or any, the more nuance of that, but just, you know, um, or that you need frequent breaks and that you've built into your schedule like frequent breaks of 30 minutes here and there, but they've decided that they're going to reduce that because it's not working time. That is, is that, and you want it to be paid. That's the conversation of, is that an unreasonable accommodation, or is it truly unreasonable, or is it just that it's not your preferred accommodation? And I know when it gets into kind of um, conversations of wages, it can be very frustrating. Uh, for example, um, for where I work, if you have more than a 1 hour medical appointment, which like all of them are, you have to take unpaid time off. And that is, I found that very frustrating. But at the same time, I'm also working in a place that is, I'm supposed to be working a 35-hour work week, and I regularly work over that. And so I, had the conversation with my employer, and I said, listen, I understand that this is your policy, but I also will be tracking all of my overtime hours. And I think that, instead of taking unpaid time off, I'll just do flex time because that makes sense to me. Does that, and they're the one that ultimately can say yes or no. But in my case, they recognize that as a lawyer, we're constantly working overtime, even though we're not supposed to. We always do, and that was appropriate for them. But I still have to, it'd be my preference that it would be based on trust, but that's not the current status of the situation, and so I have to I have to, you know, regularly send emails and kind of track my time and all that stuff, which is administratively annoying, but hey, it's just part of the gig.
So I think a lot of the questions that are coming in have to do with what you were just talking about in terms of reasonable requests and having your medical documentation in. Joanne has a question where she talks about requesting an accommodation to work from home, which was denied and the case was closed. And she's wondering how she can, I guess, fight that or get that overturned. She is allowed to work from home some days, and her request was to work from home every day.
Um, I can't like comment specifically because I don't like once I'm not giving legal advice and also I'm not I don't know the nuances of your job and you know the requirements that may require you in office. I would say generally if you have a you know um a closed file and you feel that you know it's like take a look take a look at your medical documentation. Like I said, is there anything that you feel was missed? So not the work from home part, but in terms of you know, what is it that you feel is preventing you from, um, I always say like tolerance for travel, because that really to me is how I encapsulate my inability to come into office. It's not it's hard to describe, right? You're like, I'm tired, I have brain fog, it's just it's a invisible tax coming into the office that's hard to put into form. So I have my medical professional say she's has low ability, low tolerance for travel during symptom exacerbation. If you're having a flare of symptoms, you know, it could be for a period of time with a reassessment at the end of 6 weeks. But once again, it's really kind of back to this medical information. Just because a file is closed does not mean the duty to accommodate is like the duty to accommodate is ongoing. And so sometimes uh, you know, you can say, I have updated medical. I would like, you know, for this to be reassessed. You don't even need to say the work from home part, but just be like, I have updated medical um, for my accommodations, and I, you know, please let me know what the next steps are in terms of getting a reasonable accommodation. Um, period, and then it's see how they respond, see what they say, and kind of go from there. Um, and if they come back yeah like and you know if you want to start peppering I'm always hesitant to be like and say you know like under my rights of the human rights code uh do you know feel like what you how you feel appropriate in terms of communicating um you know I will say that AI is a very helpful tool sometimes in getting your words across. I will also caution that sometimes it is not always right. Sometimes it gives legal information that is incorrect, including case law. So I would caution it in that sense. But if you're trying to figure out how to send a email, you're struggling with wording and you kind of have some information from here, like just pop it into AI and see what it says. Might it's but don't use any case law. It's always wrong.
So the next question is, um, Mel gives us a scenario. She says that there's a laborer with 3 scheduled paid breaks totaling 1 hour per day out of an 8-hour shift. Is it a reasonable accommodation, moving the total breaks to the end of the day instead of broken into the 3 breaks as specified in the collective agreement?
So whether that's reasonable or not will really depend on like what the job is and all that nuance. But I will say that I should have put this in the presentation, but um, having an accommodation that moves outside of the collective agreement is not a violation of the collective agreement. And when we're dealing with unions, um, the accommodation process is viewed as a tri-party process, which means employer, the employee, and the union. And so um, if that is a medical, you know, requirement and the concern is that the employer is going to, you know, it's up to the employer to look at that on its face. On every accommodation is a case by case basis under the duty to accommodate. And then it would be up to the union in terms of coming to this accommodation, um, just generally to say, if this is different than what's spelled out here, that we're not going to bring a grievance for breaching the collective agreement because we know that this is part of the form of a duty to accommodate, that we've come to this agreement in order to support this person to be able to work under our obligations of the Human Rights Code. But I will say that I have seen many accommodations like that. As I said, I can't speak to the specifics of your specific situation because it's, requiring looking at the job and the operational, um, realities. But I have seen accommodations like that before. Yes.
We have one last question in the chat. And Mel asks, what level of disclosure is reasonable when information is being given directly to the employer in absence of who would have access to this information if provided? And then it goes on to say when the employer is demanding return to work or satisfactory explanation or documentation that substantiates your ongoing absence directly.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, as I said, you never need to give a diagnosis. You never need to give specifics about your diagnosis. It's what you're restricted from. Sometimes employers will ask, if they feel it is appropriate for the ability to contact your doctor directly to discuss the situation. Doctors are aware that they do not need to disclose, and that will be for restrictions. I find that when you are off work, having a doctor say, this person is totally and completely unable to work is normally sufficient. However, sometimes, you get medical that says that, but then also says, but can be able to work if they're able to work from home, right? And so then all of a sudden you have kind of like two conflicting statements that the employer is trying to clarify on. I have also seen, in terms of like returning to work, they want to make sure that you actually are cleared to work because you've been off for a long time, and it's a safety, more like, a policy to make sure that you're safely returning to a safe and suitable position. But yeah, in terms of disclosing, it's really on, I know we've just talked a lot about getting medical, but at the end of the day, it's really on the duties of the employer is to make sure that they have information to assess a reasonable accommodation. And it's the responsibility of the employee to reasonably provide that information. And so, once again, we're going into these kind of conversations, but if they're saying, you know, we need this and it's requiring more information and we want to talk to your doctors like directly and we want to talk to your like GI doctor and you're going, oh my God, these GI doctors are so busy, like that's ridiculous. You know, you might be like, well, can you talk to my GP? Like that just feels a bit more accessible to me. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly enough, but that's kind of where my thought was going with when I heard that question. But follow up if you still have more questions.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions on site or online?
I guess the other thing I would say is that I'm just thinking through this. I probably should put a slide on this. Is what's in this duty to accommodate. We've heard about what the employer is supposed to do, but what are you supposed to do as an employee? And really, it's as I said, provide enough information for the employer to reasonably assess what your limitations are, so they can see how they can accommodate. Be like reasonably responsive to requests. You don't need to like if it takes, we need a doctor's appointment by day 5 on your 5th day of illness. And if you say, listen, I'm seeing my doctor, I couldn't get in until X amount of time. I am going to see them though, and I will provide a note at that time. Like that's a very normal conversation. I think sometimes when you're going through these situations and you're getting these like very like strong language letters, it's very stressful. But if you're reasonably responding and providing that communication, that's kind of part of your duty. And then also, as I said, just um, like accepting a reasonable accommodation. And sometimes it feels like it's not um, reasonable and there's a point of contention. And we discussed the different routes that you can go for that. But it is, if a case comes to a tribunal, the tribunal will say, what options were provided and did the employee, take the reasonable steps to pick accommodations that were reasonable in the circumstances. And I think, having these conversations, if you have just like tips of the trade, if you have a conversation with a manager and it's an oral conversation, like just take a few notes in your phone, the date, what was said, and next steps. And so you just kind of have a bit of a written record of what's going on. And so, which I always find really helpful because sometimes memories are short and, it's like nice to be like, oh, well, I talked to you on March, blah, blah, blah about this. And, this was said, or, this person has now left the organization, but this was kind of the arrangement that we came to and blah, 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 blah.
That's super helpful, Megan. And I just want to point out that people are writing in the chats. Thank you so much for such an informative and interesting and engaging presentation. I think that this is something that has the potential, if hasn't already, affected us all, especially with a chronic illness, right? It's not just a one-time thing. Sometimes it can be ongoing. So I think everyone really appreciates all of the effort that you put into this tonight and answering all of our questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and I'll see you around. I'm always on the chat, but normally pretty quiet. So on these group meetings, so it's nice to meet some of you guys in person, and I really find these groups are super important. And I know when I was off work, I was it was really tough. So it's nice to be able to stand here and say that I'm working full time with accommodations, and hopefully this can provide some helpful information to those that need it.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much.
I just want to remind everyone that if you're not already on the notification list to know when these presentations are happening, please be sure to get in touch with our fabulous Brenda or Erin, both of whom do so much to help keep this group running. And otherwise, I will turn it over to Megan and to Brenda and everybody on site.
We're good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. That was great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.
When we send it up, we put a QR code for evaluations.
Yeah.
Right? So it will be recorded, Megan will send it
Okay.
again.
I'm just gonna read some of these comments. Is that okay?
For sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. See you Wednesday.
Yes, you will. Thank you.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Great job, Caroline.
Nice to hear your voices and to even though I can't see everyone.
Caroline.
Have a good rest of your week, everyone. Thanks again, Megan. You did a really fantastic job.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just gonna step away from the podium.
Thanks, Karen. This is for you. Yeah.
I'll end the call for you, Caroline.
Huh?